Hello and welcome to the December edition of AviaDev Insight Africa's connectivity update for 2025. We are the podcast offering a deep dive into the stories behind the route developments and the fleet developments affecting sub-Saharan Africa. I am your host, John Howe, CEO and founder of AviaDev Africa. We are a platform dedicated to supporting the fleet and route developments within the region. And for the intros this month, for my two esteemed guests, I'm going to be channeling my inner Kwame Nkrumah, a leader whose vision for a connected, integrated Africa still inspires much of what we do on this podcast. Nkrumah believed that Africa's progress would be accelerated by unity, collaboration, and the ability to move freely across our continent. And in building the Africa we seek, we rely on those whose experience stretches across the continent's airports, airlines, and operations, individuals who have lived our challenges and understand our potential. Amongst them is Sean Mendis, a seasoned leader in African aviation, whose decades of operational and management experience reflect a continent in motion. From airline turnarounds to airport strategy, his work embodies the practical wisdom required to strengthen Africa's aviation foundations. Joining Sean is Behramjee Ghadially, a strategist whose work across airlines, markets, and network planning has shaped how Africa links with itself and with the world. His deep understanding of traffic flows, route performance, and commercial aviation dynamics reflects the analytical strength our continent needs as we build a more integrated future. Let us welcome them both as they share their insights that guide Africa towards a more connected destiny. Welcome, guys. Good to have you with us, and welcome to December.
Thank you very much. That was a very emotional Kwame Nkrumah. I think you channeled it well.
That's good. Oh, I do appreciate that. I thought he'd be quite a good character to pick. But what I wanted to say, of course, we're about to lift off for December. And before we start, I have to state that the opinions of my guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect those of AviaDev. That is our disclaimer done. But for everybody else, welcome to a bumper December 2025 AviaDev connectivity update. And there is no place that we can start other than in the Middle East. So we're not even going to be in Africa for our first news stories here, but we're going to be very much discussing some fleet developments because, of course, November was the Dubai Air Show and there was a lot of activity from the African airlines. So we're going to start with Ethiopian. So Ethiopian Airlines ordered 6 additional A350-900s and also exercised an option to add 11 737 MAX 8 aircraft at the air show. Sean, and no real surprise here, they just need some more aircraft and things to be added, but give us a bit of context.
I think you're absolutely right in terms of the context. Ethiopian has been growing exponentially, but this year the growth has been a lot slower because primarily their aircraft deliveries have been delayed. They've been forced to, in the short term, take on second-hand aircraft leases and misfits in their fleet. So they took a 777-300ER last December that was in a China Southern configuration. They've taken 2 A350s. One I think we discussed last month on the podcast, and the second one also got delivered. That just actually entered service 2 days ago. So they're currently up to 22 A350-900, so 20 of their own deliveries plus these 2 Sichuan Airlines NTU units, and they're going to be adding 6 more. Additionally, they've got the 4 A350-1000s, which have also, the latest one also was delivered in earlier this year. So effectively, that's going to put them up to a fleet of, they're currently at 26. That'll put them up to a fleet of 32 A350s. And they're also looking at growing their 787 fleet. They're going to be taking another 787X Hainan Airlines due any day now. And they're potentially going to have a couple more 350s from what I understand, but those are not yet inked in. So they're pretty much grabbing anything they can as far as wide body capacity goes. I think they've got a lot of fleet projects which they've had to defer because of delays in engines and things, especially the Rolls-Royce ones, the 787s, and that has delayed a lot of their projects during the year. And I think when we get to low season around February, March this year, we'll probably see them putting some of these aircraft in for some of the projects that they've deferred on it in terms of interior reconfigs and so forth that have been left pending for a while. But additionally to that has the 737 MAX order, and that's an interesting one because they've added 11 more to their current fleet. Now, their current fleet's actually an interesting sort because depending how you count them, they have anything between 22 and 31 out there. Currently, there's a bunch of them with ASky, which are technically Ethiopian frames, which are subleased onwards to ASky. But in their own fleet right now, they're operating 20 standard maxes. So that is the maxes with the 16 business, 33 rows total. Sorry, 34 rows on the max. And sorry, it goes up to row 34 on the max. Let's be clear on this. But they've also got two ex-Ural airline airframes, which are 8 business and a much higher density economy. And those are used primarily on domestic flights and I think also on the overnight flight to Entebbe for some strange reason. So they're used domestically, they're used to Hargeisa, they're used to Entebbe, basically on the high density economy class routes over there. So 22, including those two, plus one BBJ, which they also operate as a VIP. In fact, if you saw the Prime Minister of Singapore, when he was attending the G20 down in South Africa, he made a subsequent visit to Addis, and he flew on Ethiopian Airlines' VIP BBJ. There was much wahala on social media about that. So basically, Ethiopia is going to be adding 11 more, and those are going to come into the main parent airline fleet. The most interesting part about that, there's no surprise about them adding more Maxes. This is the backbone of their fleet. They will replace the 800s, which are slowly being phased out anyway. But these are going to actually have the Collins flatbed, the Collins seats installed in them. And this is something that I think 2 years ago we mentioned this when they signed at the was it 2 years ago when they initially signed an agreement with Adient to provide flatbed seats initially for the 787 fleet. So the initial GE powered 787s, which don't have fully flat beds yet, they're still angle flat. And Adient, which is a Boeing company, was supposed to actually Adient's rebranded themselves now, but anyway, back then it was Adient, and they were supposed to be refitting those onto the 787s, which didn't happen, and they were also supposed to be looking at those for the 737 MAX, which didn't happen. So the interesting thing now is to see that Collins has jumped over Adient in that, even though there's more Maxes being added. And there's been a lot of speculation in terms of what's going to happen. I think we'll go back to what Mesfin has said before. The reluctance of ET to use the 737 MAX into Europe has been because of the inconsistent product. It's very difficult to sell a product on an overnight long haul flight when if you're flying on one flight in the day, you're getting a lovely flatbed Wi-Fi and everything else, and if you're flying in the other flight on the day on the MAX, you're getting basically a domestic recliner seat. And this has been an important step that they've been looking to do, and I think the fact that they're doing it and the fact that they're beginning to use the MAX on a lot more longer haul operations. They're flying them to Accra, Lagos, Abuja. They're flying them to India. They're flying them to these places. Some of these sectors are 6-7 hours. And Athens, Warsaw, all the Eastern European potential destinations which they already serve and the ones that they potentially will serve can be opened up with a lower density MAX with the proper business class configuration. So I think it's not a surprising move. I think the only real surprise over there is the fact that they've abandoned Adient as far as their seat choice goes. Not due to any problem other than supply chain, I think. And they're going in with Collins. And of course, Collins is a big vendor to them. A lot of their aircraft have Collins. Although, ironically, their 350s seem to be using the Safran Optima seat now. So there's a lot of, I think all of this is being driven by supply chain more than anything, but that's the interesting thing. And one last thing on Ethiopian from my side is, since we're discussing Ethiopian, there's always a new route or new something to announce, and the latest one seems to be that they're going to be starting flights to Jizan in Saudi Arabia, and that's going to start from next month. Very low risk, short flight. Jizan, for those who don't know, is southern Saudi Arabia, right by the border with Yemen. It's a major labor hub. There's always going to be traffic from Africa into Saudi, especially with Saudi's current economy, with so much construction, so much development happening. And an overnight flight on the night bank where they've got a surplus of 737s already sitting around it's a no-brainer. There's going to be a lot more of these, maybe to secondary Saudi cities and other stuff in the Middle East, because the Horn of Africa, they've saturated East Africa already. Everywhere that they can fly to at night, they're flying to. The Horn of Africa and Somalia are not quite areas where you're able to put in a flight landing at 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock in the morning. So these surpluses of 737s on the night bank is going to increase, and they have to find flying for them. And it's purely operational cost effectively leads to break evens. I expect we'll see more flights like this. Maybe after Jizan, you may see Abha, you may see. There's a range of secondary Saudi cities out there that they potentially could serve very easily on the overnight bank, 2 hours out, 2 hours back.
Yeah, places I've never heard of really, but we've seen what they've done in the UAE with serving all these points and massively increasing capacity there. So why not? They're going to be first movers. So Behramjee, I'm sure you got something to add on there.
Just one point is on the Ethiopian order. I don't know for sure, but I feel that these 6 A350-9s will eventually down the road replace the 6 777-200 LRs, and the LRs will be converted into freighters, as that would be the more logical thing to do instead of buying
Down
fresh
the line,
new freighters.
definitively. And no, definitively, that is what their plan is on the LRs. But I think in the short term, the 350s are there for. We know this. Messman has said exactly that they need more wide bodies for expansion. And just as a little aside there, again, from chats with people at Ethiopian over the last month, Ethiopian has this year, because of these capacity limitations, has taken a decision that rather than expanding into a wide variety of new routes, they're going to consolidate capacity en route. So you're going to see higher capacity aircraft en route. So again, the 787 growing all the way up to 350, 1000, and also increased frequencies in a lot of routes. And we've seen that again with their increases to Nigeria and so forth on that. Ethiopian strategy this year has been more of consolidation rather than expansion, similar to what we've seen in years past. But so I think we're going to see that change. I remember Ethiopia's getting a new CEO next year, and their two potential competitors, potential candidates for the role, and I think both of them have very clear ideas that they want to get back into an expansion mode, judging by their personality. So I think while this may be a year of consolidation, next year and the year after that in particular are going to see a lot more expansion ahead of the opening of Bishoftu Airport, which is probably going to be 5 or 6 years from now.
Awesome. Yeah. Both are listeners to this podcast. So good evening, good afternoon and good evening wherever you are. And nice to have you with us. Perfect. Air Senegal, Behramjee, because this was a surprise to me. They've always, with the links to France, they've been a big Airbus operator, but they announced that they've made their first direct purchase from Boeing in 2 decades when they ordered 9 737 MAX 8s with options for a further 6 during the Dubai Air Show. So as somebody who used to be there, part of the team, how do you see this playing out? Is this a good move? Where's it all come from?
Thank you, John. Firstly, I was as surprised when I woke up that day when Air Senegal announced this order. Just to be clear, it is not a firm order by any stretch of the imagination. It is just an MOU. They've just paid the 1% down payment deposit, which is required as per regulation for the MOU. So it's not a firm order. It's not something that's definitely happening or not. So let's get that out of the way first. That's the first thing. Second thing is, yes, I was very surprised because, number one, the airline, they've ordered 15 737 MAX 8s, though the government spokesperson the next day said it could be MAX 9 and MAX 10 depending on how the airline consolidates itself and performs over the years. But regardless of that, they previously used to operate 2 A321s, which have the same capacity as the 737 MAX 8s. And they've ordered at least minimum 9 MAX 8s, which I feel is a bit too much because they don't have enough routes to fly a 9 A321 equivalent sized aircraft presently. nor in the future. But most importantly, the government in Dakar cannot afford such a big purchase. So I will be very surprised if this order ends up getting firmed up. Even if half the airplanes get delivered, I will be very surprised. And that too, they ordered 6 additional Maxes as options, which is even more strange to me and bewildering because it's too much basically. Why this happened, how Boeing got this basically a coup d'etat is because, to be frank, Air Senegal has been let down by Airbus a lot, especially with the way in which the A330 Neo engine issues have been handled and also the A220 Pratt& and Whitney engines.
No, hold on. Engines are not made by Airbus, Behramjee.
No,
I
no, I
mean,
know that.
they've
I know,
been let down by, yeah.
but they expect Airbus to help out with all of this, no?
Do you think that this is? Do you think that this is really, it's a shot across the bows of Airbus to say, don't take us for granted? Is that what you're saying, Behramjee? It's, we will sign with Boeing, we will do this because it gives us some semblance of power to try and get what we want from this relationship, and it's not really serious? Is that what you're saying? Like, you can't ever see it happening?
No, Boeing also made a very good aggressive offer, it seems, because it was an entry into West Africa, apart from ASky. They wanted some foothold into that market space. But from what I know is that I will be very surprised if this order ends up getting firmed up because the Dakar government cannot afford it. It's as simple as that. When it comes down to paying the 25-30% PDPs, that's when drama will start because they will not be able to afford to pay that.
And there's been some stories in the news about leases not being paid, right? There was some
Yes,
things
yes,
happening there. So, that against the backdrop of ordering and signing MOUs
yes,
seems
yes,
very contradictory.
yes, because the one bank in France, some BPI Finance Bank, announced that they are suing Air Senegal to repossess two of the A330 Neos because of default payments. So that's then also right now the present fleet, they have three A320s on ACMI. It's basically, unfortunately, I've not been there for the last 3 years, but it's quite chaotic as I could make out because only the one ATR is on their own register, whereas the three A320s are ACMI and they had one 777 doing ACMI to Paris, but that's finished also now. Now they're operating the last few days. It's been 737-800 ACMI and the A320 ACMI. So I feel sorry for the staff there, especially the ones at the airport who have to manage with the left behind baggage and overbooking of the flight. So I really don't think so. This order will end up materializing into a firm order. Not definitely not for 15 aircraft, and probably not even for 9 aircraft.
And how do you see it, Sean?
Would be surprised if the airline's still around at a stage when these aircraft are potentially ready for delivery. Leave aside all of the financial things. When a bankrupt, and effectively they are a bankrupt entity, morally bankrupt and financially bankrupt. But when a bankrupt entity comes out and says, "We're gonna buy a castle and run the world," they're more of a Pinky and the Brain kind of outfit than someone who should be taken serious. It's a joke. Let them demonstrate they have the first idea of which side of the plane points up before they start going out and placing all these wild and wonderful orders with delusions of grandeur. Because that's exactly what it is. It is a delusion that an airline, and remember this, while we're looking at Air Senegal in isolation, this is the fifth national airline in Senegal. Over the last 25 odd years, since Air Afrique, there's been a new national airline in Senegal every 5 to 6 years. So the mere fact that they're trying to recapitalize and do all this under the same entity, why do you think that trying to do the same thing for the sixth time is going to work? I'm sorry, I don't take this seriously. It's a good coup for Boeing in terms of being able to say, hey, I got my 1% on it, and because that will be forfeit to Boeing in due course, and to be able to point to others saying, look, we've got this client in West Africa and so forth. If these planes fly, I will eat my Make Airlines Great Again hat.
Okay, two things on that. Yeah, one is Thank goodness we put the disclaimer in. And the second one is, what are we looking at? 1% of the 9? So what kind of number could that be?
Probably
right
nothing,
now,
because it's probably even going to be covered by US export financing or something. So it's probably
Right,
zero
okay.
cash actually gone down. They don't have cash. Where they
Yeah.
can't pay their staff salaries on time. They can't pay
wow.
their aircraft leases. They can't pay anything, and they're going to go and put cash down to Boeing. Come on.
Yeah. That was how it looked on the outside, because I read the same week that story about the leases, and I'm thinking, how does this work? I wouldn't feel too happy if I was owed money. No, it doesn't.
Airline
It doesn't.
doesn't
It's
work.
optics.
Just look at what that airline does. Lots of grandiose announcements, of which 1% actually come to fruition. And even the ones that come to fruition are rolled back in 3 weeks.
Yeah, we've got some Senegal. I know the airport as a whole is not doing too badly. So we've got some Senegal route news later in the podcast. But let's park that one for now and let's go and stay in the region. And let's go to Côte d'Ivoire, Behramjee, because this one was super exciting, right, for our friends down at Embraer. So Air Côte d'Ivoire ordered 4 Embraer 175s with options for 8 more. So talk to us about this. Is it good? You did a bit of a deep dive on this one, right, as well. We'll put the link into that little article and little thought process. But yeah, you kick us off with this, and then I think Sean's got some ideas too.
Sure. Firstly, the Air Côte d'Ivoire order also caught many people by surprise because of the scale of which it was ordered, 4 E75s, E1s, plus 8 options. Now, the key thing here is that the 8 options are not for E75s. They are for a range of the E75 as well as E219, E95, E2. So it's a flexible option scenario for them. Now, the reason why I believe the E75 E1 was chosen was because as Air Côte d'Ivoire had some issues with the Pratt& Whitney engines on the A320neo, and they know that the E2s also have the same engine. And I believe the management did not want any similar hassle with an E2. So they played it safe, which was the right thing to do, and they ordered the E1 E75 instead. Those aircraft are going to be replacing the Q400s, once they start getting delivered, and with 76 seats on board, 12 business class, 64 economy. And there's many advantages of the 75 that Air Côte d'Ivoire has. Number one, as I mentioned in my LinkedIn post, it can fly for an additional 2 hours versus the Q400. It allows certain routes to have increased frequencies with lower gauge and lower risk. It can increase certain flights currently which are too big for the A320 or the A319 to be put on a E75 non-stop in both directions. For example, right now, Air Côte d'Ivoire flies Abidjan, Abuja, Yaoundé, Douala on A320. Obviously, because they cannot fill an A320 by itself on the Cameroon route. But E75, I would say, would be better suited for such a route non-stop in both directions. Then other routes where the E75 can make sense for them is Ville, Point Noir, and Conakry, as well as on their double daily Cotonou services. So a lot of flexibility is on offer with the E75 because it can take more baggage than the Q400 and also can fly further afield. So I feel the order was quite smart because it's long-term thinking, and also it's a safe order because they chose the E1 version of the aircraft. So they won't have any engine issues. Now, the only problem which I see with this order is that, as we have seen, they have not prepared themselves well with the A330-900 Neo integration, which was a totally new aircraft fleet type into their mix. I hope that they learn their lessons from this A339 integration and they don't screw up the E75 integration, because right now, as we know through various media sources, Air Senegal pilots are flying the Air Côte d'Ivoire A330 Neo flights into Paris, and they were helping them out a lot, which is fine. It's both carriers are partners, but with E75, they should prepare well in advance because they will have 2 to 3 years advance notice. Though they had the same amount of notice for the A330-900 Neo, but obviously nothing much was done, it seems. So that's the only advice I would give both Embraer and Air Côte d'Ivoire, that they should prepare properly. And Embraer is very good at preparing airlines like this. So hopefully things should be better in the long run for them.
Great. Yeah. Sean, your thoughts on this one?
I'm going to summarize something I said in a chat to someone at Embraer over the last couple of weeks. And it was a congratulations, obviously, on the order. And I think they've got the right aircraft, but I think they've got the wrong order. And I think it's a subtlety over here because we're looking at the fact that I think the capacity of the 175 is a great aircraft for today. I think as a for like today replacement, a 175 fits as a perfect replacement for a Dash 8. And in fact, we're going to start coming to that conversation in our next line item, which is Air Congo and what they're going to be doing as well. But in that 75 seat capacity, 175 is the only E1 product still being manufactured. So if you're looking to make a new build order, you're stuck with the 175. The problem is the 175, I think it's an artificial airplane. The 175 actually exists because of US scope clause. And its weight and its
Correct.
capacity is such that it is an aircraft that the US carriers can operate slightly below the need to make it a mainline aircraft with obviously mainline union pay schedules, and they can run it through their regional franchise partners. As a result, the 175 is currently overpriced in the market. And we maybe not at the primary market, but definitely in the secondary market. When you are doing your analysis in terms of what am I going to do with this aircraft at the end of its lifespan, what is Air Côte d'Ivoire going to do in 5-7 years? Because I agree, the E2 is a challenge right now with engines and so forth. But if you're good at negotiation, you can actually write a decent contract around that. But more importantly, if you are looking at serving a 70-seat market, what is the 70-seat market today? You're looking for in 2 years' time to be replacing that with another 70-seater. You are not thinking growth. You should be thinking of a 90-seater or a 100-seater, because if you can't grow your 70-seat market to a 100-seat market today, you've got a problem. What they should have done is realistically gone for secondary market 175s, even 190s, and transition those into E2s. I think that would have been a more ambitious, logical, I would have chosen probably to do that. I can see why they did this. It is a defensive move, but I think that sums up a lot about Air Côte d'Ivoire, where they don't have a history of making good decisions, and they're either being too optimistic about the chances and routes like 4-class A330s to Beirut. And on the other hand, they're being overly conservative on this, where they're assuming that the replacement in 2 years for a 70-seater is going to be another 70-seater as opposed to a 90-seater. And I think that's where, as I say, it's the right order. Sorry, it's the right plane, it's the wrong order. I would have rather gone for secondary markets on this, which you can then dispose of, because by the time these aircraft are ready for disposal in 15 to 20 years' time, we hope, there is no market for the E175 that's still going to exist. So they are going to be stuck with these assets I don't know what they'd be able to do with them, because I do not see that the current lease rates and secondary market values for the E175, which are inflated because of US scope clause, that they're going to be maintained. And that's going to be a huge challenge for them in terms of 10 to 15 years from now, if they're thinking that far.
Yeah, very interesting analysis, definitely. I'll come to you, Behramjee, for sure. But obviously, they seem to be in this, we want to be premium, we're going to get new aircraft. Maybe that's driving this, and they just didn't really want to consider the secondary market. But to your point, I would assume if you've got this kind of aircraft built for the US market, there's quite a variety on the secondary market from a 175, because if it's made for that market, when they get to the end of life, then obviously they can come somewhere else, right? Come to Africa, for example.
But if you look at the cost, look at the cost of a 175 on the lease market or in a secondary purchase market currently runs a higher average cost than a 190. And I want to understand that. the unit costs of operating a 175 are slightly higher than a 190. So what's the real benefit of flying a 175 over a 190 other than when you are constrained due to performance or due to scope clause or whatever else? It makes sense. If you're looking for a like-for-like replacement of the Dash 8, this is as close to a like-for-like you're getting. The Dash 8 is not being manufactured anymore. It's either of this or an ATR. And if you're looking at range or things as such, then this is the logical choice. So it is the right aircraft choice that they are making, that they're having to get into Embraer products on it. I disagree with the fact that they are getting new build 175s, because the problem with the new build 175 is what difference did it make for them? It's not their money, it's taxpayers who are going to pay for this. I think that is where the whole thing goes. They don't think about what's wiser for our shareholders, they're like, what's shiny?
Yeah, that was my point. It's like long-term versus short-term, but I take your point. I think the point about growth as well, about having some more seats. If you get a 190, you can grow into that. And if the lease rates, etc., are similar, it does make it an interesting conversation to have. So, yeah, last point on this, Behramjee, to you, please.
Yes, I wanted to say one thing regarding the E2 options that they have for 8 aircraft. This is an interesting thing because if they want to streamline and standardize a narrow-body fleet, they could down the road replace the A319s and A320s with the E95 E2. So they will have only one standard narrow-body fleet type, which will in due course result in major cost savings and better things for maintenance, procurement, HR, etc. So I would hope that they think along those lines.
I assume Embraer are thinking along those lines, Behramjee.
Yeah, but the only thing is they have a couple of brand new A320neos, so it'll be tough to get out of those contracts. But everything can be renegotiated.
Yeah, but they'll probably default and have them repossessed. We're looking at Senegal, as you said, their partners in the airlines do a lot of similar things. So they'll be defaulted and repossessed by that. And I think let's also keep in mind, and this is going to be a very important thing. I mean, I don't have the specifics of this, but a lot of the West African French countries are not quite in Paris's best graces at all times, and the export financing is an important part of this. And Embraer has been aggressive in their export financing, and I don't doubt for a second that Brazilian financing is playing a big part in this order, to the exclusion of the French financing, where Côte d'Ivoire is already heavily overextended on just those two A330s.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. But yes, Behramjee, last point.
Sean, I think, can all the domestic airports in Ivory Coast handle the E90? Because you have maybe that.
You can handle a 175. If you can handle a 175, there is absolutely no reason why you shouldn't be able to make any minor modifications. There's not a huge difference between them. There may be slight differences in terms of various airport factors, but there's absolutely no reason that with the 2-year window that you're looking forward to, you can't make those modifications fairly easily. That is not there's a very small envelope where the 175 is able to operate where the 190 is not, in places like Aspen, Colorado, and things like that, where the 175 is approved. But as far as I know, there is no such topography or issue with any of the airports in Côte d'Ivoire. It may just require slight runway lengthening things, but 2 years is plenty of time that if they wanted to do that this can be done fairly easily. So I don't think that was a driving factor. I think the factor is basically, we have a 70-seater, let's look for a 70-seater, rather than thinking, oh, we have a 70-seater, we're probably going to need 90 seats in 2 years' time, because they've never been about opening new markets and growth. They've been copycat. Their entire network, their entire long-haul strategy has all been about, this is what Air Afrique used to do. Let's just duplicate it, much like Senegal.
Yeah. All right, let's move on. We've got a couple more stories from Dubai Air Show. The first one, and Sean alluded to this already, which is on behalf of Air Congo, that Ethiopian ordered 2 ATR 72-600s, and that's on the back of the partnership agreement signed in 2024. Now, interesting because, of course, Ethiopian have had a lot of Dash 8s and now moving and transitioning to ATR. I was with the ATR team last week at AFRA as well. They signed a strategic partnership with Ethiopian again, 2024, to talk about doing some of the MRO, doing the maintenance there in Addis. So there's obviously a big focus from ATR to get in with Ethiopian, as they're obviously still manufacturing the ATR 72. And this seems to be quite natural. But yeah, go on, Sean, fill us in. Tell us what this is about. Am I on the right lines?
I think you're absolutely right. The Dash 8 is not being manufactured anymore. And if the Dash 8 was still in production, Ethiopian wouldn't have signed this deal. They'd have just ordered more Dash 8s. But the point remains that if you're going to need a turboprop, which you're going to need for operations in Congo, you can't be running a 737 jet around there. What are you going to be doing? You've got no real choice. And so ATR is the only manufacturer in that case. However, there's a very different story when you're looking for domestic operations within Congo primarily, which is what they are looking for, versus a similar situation for Air Côte d'Ivoire, where domestic is not the reason why they're ordering these 175s. They're looking to go wider afield. So I think there's a very different market, and that's why there's been different choices. As I said, don't get me wrong, I don't disagree with Côte d'Ivoire's choice for 175s. I'm disagreeing with their choice to order new build 175s for delivery starting in maybe a year or two. I think that's where they're being too conservative. But if I were in Congo's situation, I think the ATR would be a better choice over the 175, given some of the runway restrictions and some of the other stuff that they're playing with over there. But at the same time, I don't think this ATR was a viable choice for Côte d'Ivoire. Both sides made the right decision as far as the choice of aircraft goes.
Yeah, and also at present, Ethiopian doesn't operate Embraers, and whereas this ATR putting the MRO, like this sort of partnership.
ATRs either.
No, but I know that, but they put in the building blocks by saying we can do the MRO in Addis, and these kind of starting to set the ground so that then this order can come in and give them a bit of security. No.
No, I don't think that's incorrect. I don't think that's something that would have been exclusive. If Embraer was realistically going to have a chance on this order, they would have done exactly the same. The point is the product. The ATR and the E175 may have the same seat capacity, more or less, but they are very different aircraft. It's not like apples and oranges, it's apples and fish.
Yeah, absolutely. Apples and fish. Right. Excellent. Right. Last story on Dubai Air Show, Behramjee, is the huge Flydubai orders, I think on consecutive days. So the first one, 150 A321 Neos, which is particularly interesting because they are a 737 MAX operator. But then it was followed up swiftly with 75 737 MAX with an option for another 75. So 300, but 150 A321s and 150 Maxes, but of course split with options and firm. So just an astounding number of aircraft. And of course, where Flydubai is, it's going to have a big impact on the African network, no doubt, when these aircraft start arriving and being deployed. So how did you see this order? What does it mean for Africa? Kick us off on this one.
Sure. With regards to the A321 Neo order, again, just like Air Senegal's order, this is not a firm order, it's an MOU for the 150 aircraft. It's more or less Flydubai hedging its bets because they're a bit irritated with the delays to the MAX 10 certification because they wanted an aircraft of that size to expand their network capacity. So this way they have a good bargaining chip against Boeing. Number two, which is the more interesting thing, is that a lot of these A321 Neos that have been ordered are the LR versions. They're not the standard Neos. A lot of them are for the LR version. None of them are for the XLR version, though. But quite a sizable number are for the LR version, which, by the way, their CEO stated last year in an interview which I read on CH Aviation, that the LR gives them the extra flexibility to fly longer range flights up to 7.5 to 8 hours from Dubai. So the 321s for Flydubai will definitely have flatbed seats in business class. They will not be all economy because Flydubai is no longer a low-cost airline, not since pre-COVID days. So approximately, I would say they would probably configure their A321 Neos to have 16J 168Y, which is 184 seats. It can fly up to northern Nigeria non-stop if Sudan airspace is open. So routes which could be launched with this aircraft are like Abuja, N'Djamena, Douala. Those are low-risk routes with the A321 instead of using a wide body. N'Djamena to Dubai now is about 35,000 passengers a year. Plus it has a lot of demand for Saudi Arabia as well. Cameroon also has very high demand for Dubai and small demand for the other network. But for Africa, the 321 incremental seats will be very useful on the high labor market routes, especially in East Africa, which will offer more capacity in the 737 MAX 9. It could also go all the way up to Congo with a full payload up to Brazzaville and Kinshasa, but I bet that's Emirates' territory. So I don't think so. Flydubai will be going to Kinshasa, at least for the time being. But yes, it gives them the flexibility to expand further into northern Africa as well. Places like Algeria, secondary cities in Algeria can also be looked at, which the Emirates wide body is too big for. There's that second city in Algeria. Sean, do you know the name? They fly to Paris,
Oran.
Air Algeria, Oran, and one other city in Tunis. So those routes could also be opened up with the 321 LR. So overall, it's basically Fly Dubai telling Boeing in no uncertain terms that enough is enough. We cannot keep on relying on you. And there's been too many delays to the MAX 10. Now we've taken decision to go ahead with the 321 Neo, but we're also going to order more Maxes just in case you get your act together in time. And also
Yeah,
remember,
really.
they need a lot of aircraft for the DWC expansion, as everybody will be moving to DWC from 2032 onwards gradually. Yep.
That was the point I wanted to make. Yeah, that's a huge move, and they've got all this capacity, and they need to fill that.
Yeah.
Sorry, Sean.
But importantly, if you look in terms of it, these deliveries are going to be spread out over the next decade. So the reality is the last aircraft in this order will be replacing the first aircraft in this order. And so if you look at it, these guys, they keep their aircraft on 6 to 8 year windows, and then they're phasing them out anyway. And these airframes, again, to go back to the point I was making earlier, these airframes will still have a secondary market for them in 6 to 8 years. Yes. So these are wise planes to take the options on, and if you need them, take them. If you don't need them, you'll make your money selling those delivery slots, if nothing else. So these are highly excessive orders, but these are highly ambitious airlines, and I'm never going to say it's not going to work, because they'll find something to do with it, and they may pivot their business model. They've got a new airport. They've got a whole range of things there. I don't know what exactly they will do with them, but I think Behramjee's outlined good cross-section of what they can do with them.
Yeah, and also just to pick up, even though we said Flydubai is a 737, is a Boeing operator, with the parent in Emirates having A380s, A350s, there's so much ability to be able to handle this. It's not like a completely new aircraft or new manufacturer to the entity as a whole. Is that fair?
No. And there's something about economies of scale. You reach a point with economies of scale where you've either got to double your economy of scale, so you've got your full economics for one fleet type would say 150 airframes, just as an example. For your next 150 aircraft, you can either double what you have before, but you're not really getting any more economies of scale. You're having to double it, or you can just bring in a whole other economy of scale, and now you've got two separate economies of scale. So I think what we have learned over the last probably the decade or so, especially when we've seen things like Boeing 737 MAX groundings with the PWGTF engine issues and things, that making yourself overly dependent on a single supplier or a single supply chain has led to stagnation in growth, has led to delays in delivery, has led to basically a lot of losses for the airlines, which previously thought that their economy of scale was scalable beyond a point. And I think we're seeing that in a lot of different airlines' orders, that they are, if not hedging their bets, but ensuring that they have their options across different supply chains.
Yeah, risk mitigation is smart, and it's a nice thing to be able to order this many planes and to be able to look at this far in the future, which you have to do with the fleet planning now. It's just such an amazing thing to think, what's the market going to look like in all these years, multiple years times? If you don't join the queue, then you're multiple years out. That concludes our Dubai Air Show deep dive. So we're going to get into the route news now for the region, and we're going to actually stay with the Emirates Group and Emirates themselves. So it was teased a little bit around Dubai Air Show, but Emirates have announced that they, starting 1st of July 2026, they're going to have a third daily flight to Cape Town. Now that will be a 777. Of course, Cape Town International can't handle the 380, but it adds a lot of extra capacity. But they also announced Nairobi will have a third daily service as well from the 1st of March 2026. That means 21 flights a week from the carrier using the 777 into Kenya as well. Yeah, these plus Emirates... Plus Flydubai. Yeah, true. Yeah, I'm saying Emirates on its own, but you got to add Flydubai, I suppose, to that too. And we'll talk about the Kenya side first, but just from an Emirates perspective, this is just densification on the network, and a market like Cape Town can obviously handle it. And we've seen the growth in Nairobi this year. Do you want to start us with this one, Behramjee? What do you think about this? Just pretty straightforward?
Not straightforward in the sense, according to me, the excess capacity dumping into Nairobi by all the Gulf carriers for next year and even this year is a bit too much. It's basically a competition amongst themselves for market share and market dominance and market penetration, which will eventually lead to one of them suspending the Nairobi flights next year, which I forecast to be Gulf Air, because Gulf Air will be the weak link over here, according to me. I also, it's really too much capacity being dumped into Nairobi, and unfortunately, Kenya Airways will suffer a lot. Their Asia and GCC market share will take a severe hit. Even some of their European market share will take a hit, because I have over here the top 10 markets that Emirates connects from Nairobi compared to Qatar Airways, and it's very interesting actually. Qatar Airways Nairobi traffic in the last year, 12% of it was point to point. Their biggest transit market, the biggest top five feeders is number one is London, backtracking. Number two is Madrid, 11,000 passengers backtracking. Number three is Riyadh, which is obvious with the growing labor market boom that's going on over there, 10,000. And then the other number three, four, and five are Frankfurt, Stockholm, and Copenhagen at 7,000 each. Emirates, on the other hand, have totally different markets, except for the number one connecting. Their top market is London, beyond Dubai. 38% of Emirates' Nairobi traffic is point to point, and 62% is transit. London is the biggest market, but the remaining top five markets for Emirates are Seoul, Beijing, Shanghai, Tokyo, and Washington, D.C. And mind you, the yields that I'm seeing, the average fare, the flown average fare that Emirates has uplifted on these routes compared to what Qatar Airways has, it's much higher yielding than what Qatar Airways is doing. Qatar Airways, the yield on their Nairobi to Europe routes are much, much lower than what Emirates is selling Nairobi to Asia. What Emirates is doing actually commercially astute, and I applaud them for that. And also it helps that they have 38% point to point, which is higher yielding. But apart from that, Cape Town, 15% only of Cape Town's traffic is point to point for Dubai on the Emirates flight. Over there, their top connecting markets, number one, again, backtracking, a lot of it is Europe. London, Brussels, and Frankfurt are their top three markets connecting via Dubai, followed by Mumbai, then Manila, Bali, Bangkok, Dublin, Paris, and Amsterdam. So decent mix of Asia and Europe. Again, the yield that Emirates gets out of Cape Town to Europe is not high, but to Asia it is. For Europe, they're basically doing a price war against the African and European carriers because of the extra backtracking that exists via Dubai. Does Emirates need to fly a third daily Cape Town? I would say probably. Does it need an A380 into Cape Town? I would say definitely not. The 777 is perfectly suited for Cape Town because the extra revenue that you can get from the belly cargo capacity. So it's good in a way that A380 cannot be accommodated at Cape Town. But yeah, I would say low risk approach for Emirates, not too much. But Nairobi it's too much capacity being dumped. I will also not be surprised to see Etihad reducing their frequencies to Nairobi next year for at least few periods of the year, because they cannot survive flying a double 321 throughout the year on that route.
Yeah, good points. Right, Sean, there's a couple of things on here from a Kenya perspective. I think the first one is Kenya and the general environment there about the overcapacity that Behramjee's talking about. And you mentioned, I think your quote was blood in the water. So let's leave the kind of KQ. You can bring it in if you want. I want to separate the two, but they're two very much interlinked things. And also, the big point that I've noticed is that the market seems very open to outside carriers, outside of Africa carriers, not Kenyan carriers. But you were telling me there's been a route request from Ethiopian that's been outstanding for some time. So give us the take on that and the feeling about the access to the market, and then we can talk about the impact that's having on KQ.
Okay. Something I've said many times before. So if you've listened to this podcast, you've heard me say this. Kenya is hypocritical. Kenya pretends that they are open, that, oh, we allow anybody to fly to Nairobi. We just have to go through the proper procedures. And sometimes those proper procedures can be done overnight, and sometimes they take 3 years. And sometimes they'll want to take a public hearing to whether your little charter flight is allowed to overfly them. And sometimes they'll allow you to fly 3 daily 777s because, hey, somebody's gone on safari. So genuinely, I think hypocritical is the way to put it there. Hypocritical, bipolar, a whole range of different things. Kenya lacks a coherent aviation policy at this time. In some ways, they say they want to support Kenya Airways. In other ways, they say, oh, but we're not going to support Kenya Airways. That's led to problems for Kenya Airways as well. I don't think it's purely linked to that, but Kenya Airways has promised a lot of recovery. They did a very good job until last year. They've struggled right now. They promised bringing back wide-body aircraft, which they've given even concrete dates. Aircraft will be back in service by this date, which have come and gone, and they've gone silent on. And I think that is partly driving where the overall aviation sector in Kenya is struggling with incoherence as far as the policy level goes. And as a microcosm, Ethiopian Airlines has been trying to get a third daily flight into Nairobi reinstated for 3 years now. In fact, maybe even longer than 3 years. And Kenya has not refused them that third daily flight. They've just processing it for 3 years. Yet in the interim, and we've seen this, and it's not that easy for outsiders also to have these to get in, because we remember the problems that Etihad had when they came in with their initial launch. They even opened online check-in for their first flight to Nairobi, and then they had to pull the plug on that and defer the launch and forward. So it's not that they are open to GCC, but they're not open to African carriers. It's schizophrenic, bipolar, incoherent, inconsistent. Whoever gets the file on a given day, and whichever way the wind is blowing and the mood is, and maybe even who's been paid off where, determines how quickly things get done over there. And it's sad, because I've run carriers that have operated to Kenya and over Kenya, and genuinely, it was impossible to predict what would happen unless you went through a well-connected agent who would guarantee your success and wouldn't get paid unless they were able to deliver. But that's not the way it should work. And unfortunately, Kenyan aviation, and I think this is on a much larger scale than a cargo charter flying over Nairobi or whatever. But maybe this will draw more attention to it. But Kenya's got a lot of bigger problems. Kenya Airways being the biggest one of that. What is the future of this airline going to be? Because as it stands right now, on the trajectory it is right now, it is probably going to require another bailout. And that bailout is either going to have to come from the government providing cash and retaining its equity, or from the government permitting a sale of its equity, probably to a foreign partner, because there is no real domestic partner with the expertise and capital available to recapitalize KQ. And then how is the government going to have to be able to deal with basically their national asset, which they poured so much money into, and they're still on the hook for a number of their guarantees for potentially being foreign owned and or controlled. So not a good time for Kenya aviation in general. They've got infrastructure challenges. Even their plans for Nairobi airport have, fallen apart, come back together, fallen apart again. I love telling Kenyans that the first time I visited Kenya was in 1987. And if I went there today and I look at the airport, it pretty much does look the same. They've got parts of it did burn down, and that's the only reason they ever built anything new. The way they were going, they just enjoy making plans to expand JKIA, but very little has changed in nearly 40 years. And that's pathetic. For the numbers have gone through the roof. It is probably the second most important hub in East Africa after Addis. It used to be the most important hub in East Africa, and its trajectory is negative in general for Kenyan market. And I think the inconsistency of policy making is what is primarily driving that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think the airport, 1959, it was open, something like that, and it's over capacity for what it should be handling. I think it's already handling way over the numbers it was meant to.
It is a miserable experience, and it's the miserable experience that consistently gets worse. Addis has been a miserable experience at times, but you know what? Addis is always expanding, opening something new, trying to make that thing better. It gets better for a few months, then there's a whole bunch more flights, and then there's a new part of the terminal that opens. You can see a positive trend there. Kenya is a negative trend. As I said, the only time there was positive progress was after the damn thing burned down. And that really says a lot when something gets better after it burns down.
Yeah, it's true. I suppose in Ethiopia, you've got the airline and the airport all in one big family with all the other bits, and it's making money they can invest.
Aviation
Yes.
structure. There is a coherent plan there that they stick to. It is not a case of we're building Bishoftu Airport and in 2 years' time somebody will come up with a court case and say, oh, but the contract for Bishoftu was not awarded correctly because this form wasn't. I'm not denying that there was corruption there. And in fact, there's a lot more corruption in Kenya than there is in Ethiopia, these kind of deals. But you're not going to see that infrastructure project get to square one, back to the drawing board, simply because the wrong partner was in that. You would proceed with the infrastructure and then seek restitution. And I think that is where the real difference between, and it's, again, let's not blame Kenya for it. That is the reality of a democratic system versus Ethiopia, which is nominally democratic at this point.
Yeah, and we won't get into the whole let's have a debate. Should we be democratic or otherwise on this one? But I think that's a very interesting point, well made. The thing was, and obviously we brought up KQ in the last couple of episodes, but the thing that happened in November, there was a profit warning that was alluded to. There were lots of issues, as we talked about, with the AOGs. I was at AFRA last week with the CEO and the COO, and they were talking about the challenges that they're having. Last word on Kenya Airways, Behramjee, like how worried are you about their future? Are you similar to Sean that something has got to change?
Yes, on the whole, something has to change in the bigger picture. I don't think so. The Kenya government will allow Kenya Airways to fail completely because of the strategic importance that it has towards its broader economy. But I do think that it will sell its capital, a minority share, to a foreign carrier in order to raise cash. And all signs of that seem to be heading towards Qatar Airways, considering that they did a very major codeshare deal recently. Emirates for sure will not invest in Kenya Airways because Emirates does not have a policy of investing in airlines anymore. Etihad will never do it because of what has happened during James Hogan's era, and I don't think the Saudis will also do it. So the only option is for Qatar Airways. And to be honest with you, there's much better potential for Qatar Airways investing in Kenya Airways than there is for them investing in Rwanda Air. That's for sure.
However, to Sean's point, the political system in Kenya versus Rwanda is very different.
Of course, it'll be much more easier in terms of red tape and bureaucracy to get the Rwanda stake done. It'll be more difficult with the Kenya Airways stake plus also.
How many years has
Kenya
that been
Airways
pending?
unit.
7?
Yeah, but that
And the
that is
rest.
that is, I think, more so resistance from Qatar's side than Rwanda's side. But
The
pilot
resistance
union,
from Qatar's side is because they're not getting the due diligence they wanted done. But anyway.
Yeah, we'll talk about this one in a separate.
Kenya also has very strong aviation-related unions, which Qatar Airways will not like to deal with or have any part of.
Exactly. I think that's a good point. Yeah, so we'll wait and see, and we wish them well. There's some great people there, and obviously they've achieved quite a lot, but you're in that position where you've got to invest or you've got to find an investor to help you run, or you've got to go to government and say, we need more money, this isn't working. And in the interim, they are being swamped with extra capacity from these other carriers that maybe are waiting it out.
Or they
The
need to do
sharks
what
are
Delhi
scenting
did.
the blood in the water.
Yeah.
Yeah, or they need to do what Delhi did with Air India. They need to just sell it off to anyone who's interested abroad and let them take care of it.
No, but see, there's a very big difference. That's the abroad part. And remember, they went down this road with KQ when KQ sold stake to KLM back then and then became KLM France and so forth. And that has been proven that once again, you reach a cap where that is no longer viable. Where KQ reached a point where they could no longer expand into Europe because of the KLM deal. And they had to unwind that because it puts a cap on what you can do. So the foreign partner is something they're wary about. Domestic, there is not a single entity which can reasonably have both the domestic financing, as well as the domestic expertise to take over KQ. And it was a very different situation in India where the domestic expertise and financing did exist. And to come in then as the domestic lead partner with the Tata Group and a secondary external partner in Singapore Airlines was a very different story. So Kenya is not in the same situation. And KQ, we'll have to do a lot deeper dive into KQ in terms of its current ownership and where the debt was converted to equity for the banks, and a lot of stuff happened under the Uhuru Kenyatta regime in terms of changing KQ's ownership and KQ's strategic priorities, and also government guarantees for a lot of KQ's debt, which is currently on the books for KQ, which can be shed off to government through a default. So while technically it's KQ's debt, it's actually something where government either pays that debt upfront or winds up on the hook for it anyway. So it's a very complex situation over there that is not going to be easy to unwind, and even less easy to unwind without a overall holistic view of the aviation sector and where that's going to be in Kenya after Ruto's current term is over, what's going to happen next? And I think that's going to be, the politics will drive a lot of it.
Yeah, and you're not going to be able to get an investor until it's unwound, because you want to know what's going on. So the two things feed each other. It becomes very complicated that everybody's got cold feet. Yeah. Okay, fantastic. Park Kenya there. I'm sure we will come back and discuss that in more detail. Let's go and talk to our resident Canadian, Mr. Behramjee, and talk about Air Transat. So Air Transat is an airline that has announced Montreal-Dakar and Montreal-Accra both launching June the 17th and running until September, so just a short summer season. So Behramjee is our resident Canadian. Can you enlighten the listeners as to who the airline is, first of all? Because many might not even know what they operate, who they are, and then obviously talk to us a little bit about why these routes have come about, if you can still hear us, because I think your connection may have died. We've lost him, haven't we, Sean?
Okay.
Do you want to do it?
Facts on this. Sure. Yeah, Air Transat, as you mentioned, has just announced that they will commence seasonal service between Canada and Senegal. So it's Montreal-Dakar, as well as Canada to Ghana, which will be Toronto to Accra. Both of these flights will fly twice weekly, starting in June of 2026, and will run to September in the case of Accra, October in the case of Dakar, but 6 of one, half dozen the other. These have both been opened, at least the Ghana side has been opened up by the signing of a new bilateral air services agreement, the first one between Canada and Ghana. And consequently, this has opened the door for potential non-stop flights between the two countries, where previously all the traffic was having to run through Europe or through North America or elsewhere. West Africa to Canada has been a very strong growing market since COVID, for sure. And I think it has become essential that somebody operates these markets. We've addressed it ourselves on the earlier podcast, where we mentioned that this was something that Air Canada was not necessarily going to be jolted into starting these routes, because they have a safety blanket of routing traffic through Europe through their Transatlantic Alliance and codeshare partners. That's something Air Canada's current Chief Commercial Officer, Mark, has vehemently denied to me and said that, no, we would never do that. But I think whatever the motivation is, we will definitely see the first flights operating by Air Transat. And I liken this to go back 20 years to when Ghana and US had their open skies, which came into effect in 2005. And the initial operator in that market was a US, previously mainly charter carrier, North American Airlines, NAA. And the first non-stops operated from the US side to Accra were actually operated by North American Airlines. And it was almost 2 years later when Delta saw the success, or were spurred by the fact that the market is now being opened up, that Delta made their decision to start entering the market in 2006, and then obviously have now been 20 years. And I expect we will see a very similar thing with Air Transat and Air Canada, where the first steps into the market, proving of the route, and so to speak, will be done by Air Transat, and they may or may not be successful. I think the timing of this route is such that it corresponds exactly with the Football World Cup, which obviously Ghana has qualified for, even though Ghana will be playing their match in the US rather than Canada. There will be an increase in seasonal traffic on that, as well as, Ghana will be playing against England in Boston, I think, on the 23rd of June. So England better get ready to lose that. I'm a staunch Black Stars fan. But no,
As I was saying, there will definitely be strong two-way traffic over next summer. So if you're picking any summer to run a seasonal route, next summer is probably the right summer to do it in. However, I think Transat's distribution is going to be the biggest challenge in terms of getting the awareness of this route and getting the sales on this route strong enough to be able to get it up to a volume it becomes year-round sustainable. While Canada, on the other hand, with a very strong Canadian network with partnerships, I expect when Air Canada, and it's a matter of when rather than if. I mean, they have publicly said it, they have privately said it. It's a matter of when they come into the Accra market in particular, when they come into the Senegal market, and they will knock Transat out of it probably 27 or 28.
Okay, everybody. Behramjee has rejoined us now and has been listening in avidly to what Sean has got to say. So, yeah, your thoughts on this Air Transat expansion then?
I have good things and some negative, pessimistic things to say. Firstly, I think it's kudos to Air Transat for thinking outside the box and taking this initiative to open up Africa, West Africa to Canada non-stop. The markets that they've picked have good point-to-point demand, but that's where the positives end. There's a lot more negatives than positives on this. Let's start with Montreal to Dakar. Montreal to Dakar, the market size is 30,000 passengers annually. The problem is not the demand. The problem is that the A321LR that they have will 100% face a payload restriction issue when it comes to baggage uplift when the flight is more than 80% full. When I was at Air Senegal, we had analyzed the A321XLR to fly to New York with every passenger carrying two-piece baggage and the average passenger weight being 144 kilos, and it barely made it. So Air Transat's A321s, they have 199 seats in a two-class configuration, which is quite high density for a transatlantic operation. And every passenger from Montreal to Dakar will carry two-piece baggage. It will be a very rare thing to find a passenger with one suitcase, especially during the summer high season. Then not only that, as Sean correctly mentioned, Air Transat is an unknown entity in Senegal. So the Senegal agents have never heard of them. Air Transat is not as generous as Air Canada and Star Alliance and the other African carriers in giving incentives and commissions to travel agents. So that is another thing that they'll have to focus on to get. But the good thing in their favor is that at least 75% of the sale of this flight will be point of sale Canada. Now, another thing is Dakar will have directional load issues. So they'll be full or close to full in one direction, but the other direction it will not be. And that will hurt the financials of the flight. And then when you go into September and October, especially from mid-September onwards, both ways will not be that full. So that will again affect the financials of the flight. Thirdly, Air Transat cannot get any incremental cargo revenue on this flight because the A321LR will not be able to carry any belly cargo if the flight is 80% or even 75% full. So those are big handicaps. Yes, and again, like I said, kudos for them thinking outside the box, but I don't see it to be financially viable, and they'll learn that after the first year of operation on the Dakar route with the 321. But also another problem is with flying only twice a week with an A321, if your bags get left behind, you are stuck for 3-4 days. And that's going to cause a lot of problems for Air Transat because the Senegalese in Dakar, they will take out their anger on the Air Transat Dakar airport manager or whoever's their ground handling agent. And it won't be pretty. And if the ticket is bought in Canada, they'll have to shell out a lot of compensation for those passengers legally. So that's the Dakar part. Now when it comes to Accra, immigration, they've chosen to fly Toronto to Accra for obvious reasons. It's Anglophone to Anglophone to an extent, English-speaking Canada to English-speaking Africa. 37,000 passengers over the last year, point to point. Their schedule allows transit traffic to connect with Porter, with only the one one hub wave bank, because the flight arrives back into Toronto at 1800 and connects with the 2100 Porter hub wave bank to all the main cities of Canada. But the weakness for Air Transat over here is, again, just like for Dakar, it will be 95% focused on point to point. The Accra may have a bit more diversification for domestic Canada, but for Montreal to Dakar, there's no other big market apart from Montreal. It's the second biggest market is Toronto, 2,500 passengers. So I don't. That's another big weakness for Montreal to Dakar. For Accra to Canada, there is demand for Calgary, Vancouver, Winnipeg. Not so much. All of them are less than 10,000 passengers, but they don't have connection to the US with Porter on that flight in both directions. That's a handicap situation. Another handicap situation is that this is a 330-200 that Air Transat is going to be using, a 350-seater A330-200. That's a very big aircraft to be using on the Toronto Accra route. If they were using a 250-seater aircraft, which they unfortunately don't have anymore, then it's different. But regardless, filling up a 350-seater, even in high season when one way would have directional issues, it won't be able to fill a 350-seater in any direction. I would be shocked if it could. It could easily take all the baggage, no problems over there. So I have no issues with the baggage being left behind. But it's probably going to be their longest route along with Istanbul. Will it make money for them? Absolutely not. The yields on Accra, Toronto are not that high. The yield on Montreal, Dakar is a bit higher than that, a bit higher than Accra, Toronto. And where Sean correctly said, Air Canada will be coming to Accra and Lagos eventually. And once they do, Air Transat will be saying bye-bye. And the main benefit that Air Canada has on Accra and Lagos is the US connectivity via Toronto, as well as the fact that they'll be flying also smaller aircraft, offering a premium cabin, so the average yield on the Air Canada flight will be much higher. So to cut it short, it will be a very financially risky experiment for Air Transat. If I was them, I would look into flying more Istanbul flights from Toronto and having Turkish Airlines buy the capacity, so it's low risk for them. I would not. This experiment with West Africa will end up in financial tears for them.
All right. Yeah, very thorough from both of you. You happy with that one, Sean, with that response?
I agree. I think just one little flag to raise is, if I'm not mistaken, Transat's actually shutting down their operations in 3 days' time because of a pilot strike coming up. Will we even have a Transat still around by next summer is still in the air, but I'm hopeful for all the Canadian travelers over the Christmas period that this industrial relations issue is resolved quickly at Transat.
Yeah, good point to raise. All right, so our final route now for this edition is Air Tanzania, who are launching Cape Town via Vic Falls twice a week. They are launching it this week, although it was only announced about 2 weeks ago. It's a triangular route without fifth freedom rights, I believe, but there was something interesting about the launch branding and the aircraft. So Sean wants to bring this breaking news because we all spotted it, but yeah, go for it.
Okay. Air Tanzania, as you mentioned, I think there's two bits of news for Air Tanzania. I think we'll go with the bad news first, which is all bad news. It's Air Tanzania. But Air Tanzania was supposed to launch their flights to Accra on the 3rd of December, which was last week, and they no-showed. Literally, the flight was scheduled until the day before the flight, and now it's no longer scheduled, and they're not flying it. So what, where, why, how? Officially, no statement, no comment, nothing. It's just dropped out of their booking engine. All the PR is disappearing. But yeah, the reality from what I understand is that they have a shortage of A220 pilots, and consequently doing the Lagos-Accra flight effectively would have required a second crew to lay over, and they simply don't have enough pilots available at this time to do that. So that Accra has not flown, even though it was supposed to launch last week. However, as you mentioned, they have announced the immediate launching of a flight Dar es Salaam, Victoria Falls, Cape Town, Dar es Salaam. Now, I know you call this a triangular route, but the point of a triangle is that it has three sides. This is actually a straight line with a dot in the middle and then another straight line straight back at it. So I'm not quite sure what the logic of this route is. I'm not quite sure if it's meant to to cater to the large number of South Africans wanting to go to Tanzania's most boring city? Again, no offense to Dar, but very interesting. Or is there a particular reason that they want this flight to land back into Dar es Salaam at 1 o'clock in the morning with no connections to pretty much anywhere for the next 6 to 7 hours? So you can't even get Cape Town to Zanzibar easily. You land at 1 in the morning and then you've got to sit till 6:30 in the morning for the next flight to leave. It's the most illogical route. It is a pointless route the way it is structured. There is potential for this, but the way they've structured it, they've virtually guaranteed their failure. But most interestingly, as you mentioned, their PR branding for the route said powered by Boeing. So because of that, one would think that they're going to operate one of their sizable Boeing fleet of aircraft on this route. Nope, it's going to be operated by the Airbus 220 because I don't know. Well, you know what? Because if they could hardly say powered by Pratt & Whitney because Pratt & Whitney's not powering much anyway. So yeah, the latest incomprehensible decision from Air Tanzania, which really raises the question of, are they this incompetent or are they intentionally trying to lose money because of other potentially more sinister reasonings?
We'll leave that one hanging there. But yeah, it's quite unusual to see it. We saw the branding and it's quite unusual to specify it's going to be. So then if you've done that, you would assume that is the equipment they're going to use. You know, nobody's forcing you. Yeah, nobody's forcing you to do that. But then when you do it, you think you wouldn't, if you made a point of saying it, then you must be doing it. Gee, any more hope for this one?
No, it's very sad what is happening over there. I don't know, maybe I should volunteer to go there and try to see what I can do to help them.
Oh, yeah.
There's nothing to lose.
Yeah, true. Yeah, well, look, we'll wait and see. And like you say, an amazing route in concept, but obviously you've got to go back the way you came, and you've got to connect, and you've got to think about it.
Exactly. I think what they're trying to do is, again, they've got, like a government-owned airline, they've got a master plan, and part of the KPIs is how many elements of that master plan you can execute, whether it makes sense or not. So the elements were announce routes to such and such by the end of the year, and to get it done, you've got to tick the numbers off the list. Announce 4 more new routes by the end of the year. 1, 2, 3, 4. There we go.
There you go. Anything to add, Behramjee, or can we close the book for December?
We can close the book. Sean forgot to mention that they announced Accra and they suspended Accra, or they closed Accra.
I mentioned. It never flew. Oh, by the way, speaking of suspensions, Behramjee, you get a credit for this one since we were discussing Dakar.
No. We'll do that. We'll do that next week. Because that is
good teaser.
You still get the kudos now for predicting that would happen within a year. I thought it would last at least a year, but anyway, congratulations on that, Behramjee. For those who don't know, United is pulling out of Dakar in March of this year, of 26.
Yeah. So it's congratulations, but not great in terms of we don't like routes being pulled.
Congratulations to our prophet of doom and gloom.
Exactly. They've teased it very nicely and by accident, but they're pros now anyway. We are going to be doing our coveted and highly anticipated end of year awards next week. It's going to be on Thursday morning. We'll send an email round. So if you're not on our email database, go to the aviadev.com website. There's a button that says register your interest, put your email address in, and you will get all of the updates. So we will make sure that we send an email out to say that we're going to do it, because what's quite exciting is we're going to have a go at live streaming it through our YouTube and LinkedIn, if I can get the functionality to work. If you can't make it, because it is going to be in the day on the Thursday, we will, of course, post-edit it. It will be available on demand through YouTube and Spotify and all the usual places. And yeah, Sean wants to say something quickly, I think. He looks pensive. He looks ready to...
Looking forward to the awarding of the first annual AviaDev Peace Prize for great work in promoting peace in African route development. And I wonder who the winner of that is going to be.
Yes, I'm very excited about this as well. So yeah, we'll have a lot of fun. We promise.
But I wonder who's going to win.
I wonder who it could possibly be. But also on this as well, the really cool part about it is we set the categories and Sean and Behramjee are completely independent in their deliberations. And then when we meet and we're live, that is when there is no conferring. It is literally a discussion about why did you do that? Why didn't you pick that? Have you picked the same one? And they'll have their reasons. So it's a bit of a debate as well, which I think is quite fun. So make sure that you connect with the guys or you follow them on LinkedIn. If you haven't already, Behramjee's there doing his deep dive, Sean doing his bits as well. I'll put those links into the Air Côte d'Ivoire deep dive that Behramjee put in as well. Thank you out there for everybody for listening and sticking with us for the last hour and a half or so. Do share it with somebody in your network that you think would benefit. You can subscribe, as Sean always reminds me. I have to say that at the end. And thank you for listening, and thanks for and wishing you the best for the end of the year here in December. So yeah, take care. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye for now. Bye.